Hey, welcome back to my channel. I'm Erica and I appreciate you being here. Today we are going to go through my backlog of library books. There are some DNFs, but the ones that are not DNFs, I'm going to give you some reviews for. I like to do batches of the ebooks from the library because a lot of them just have such long hold times that when I can get a group of long holds to be able to pull them out at the same time after I don't know, 16, 20-week holds, I'll just do that all at once because the books are in great demand. So I went through all the books in this batch, and this video is going to be my reading journey with them. You'll either see my reasoning for what I DNF'd, or you're going to get my reviews for the ones that I finished. At the end, you're going to see me right back here. I have one more review to do on the final book, and then we'll do my final thoughts on this group of reading. For right now, let's go ahead and get started, and I'll see you back here at the end with my final review. The natural light is crazy right now, but we are gonna do this. I just finished all of the first chapters. Do have some DNFs already. I will start with those. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I didn't really think there was anything awful about this. Just the writing style, I could tell based on the first chapter, is just not for me. It's not one that sucks me in, makes me want to keep reading to find out what happens. I haven't read anything by this author before. I've seen a lot of people say that this is a good example of her writing style. If that's the case, then I think her writing style just isn't for me. I didn't think it was bad. Like I said, it's not the kind of writing that really sucks me in to make me want to keep reading this type of book. To be fair, the kind of fiction that she writes is not really one that I like very often. It's hard for me to find just a general fiction book like this that I can really get into. So I don't think it's a reflection on her as an author that the first chapter just didn't suck me in. It's rare that I find a book like this that I actually feel compelled, ooh, this is gonna grip me, I want to keep reading. Unfortunately, this just wasn't one of them, so I'm gonna go ahead and DNF it. Community Board is my second DNF. Much like the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, this is the same kind of just general fiction that it's rare I find one that makes me want to keep reading it. I thought this one initially might have some potential because it seemed like it might be a little bit funny, but it really just, the kind of writing style, again, was not for me. I just felt like this is a book where if I continued reading it, I was going to end up regretting not DNFing it earlier because I just kind of know myself well enough at this point most of the time to recognize when a book style just isn't going to be for me. I think that if you like the general fiction genre that comes out, I think this one you probably would really like it. It did seem like it was going to be kind of funny, and so you might want to try picking this one up if you like something that's going to be a main character going through, processing a difficult time in her life with just a little bit of humor. You might like this one. Caraval, I DNF'd this, to be fair, before I got to the end of the first chapter because I could tell within just the first few pages this book was not going to be for me. I'm a person, when I'm reading, I really need to connect with the writing style. I need it to work for me. This writing style just did not. There are fantasy elements that are going to be happening in this book. If you like YA fantasy, you might like this. For a YA book, the kind of writing in this book is pretty common, so I think if you're into YA fantasy and the writing style just isn't that important to you, you're more there for the atmosphere, the plot, I think you could get into this. But I could tell as I was reading the first chapter, with the introduction of what I believe are probably going to be at least two main characters, possibly a third main character, which is the two sisters, and then this random sailor dude. The introduction of them and how they were all introduced already kind of annoyed me. With the introduction of these three characters and how they interacted with each other, I could tell it was going to end up being a writing style that just wasn't going to work for me, and I knew at some point I'm gonna end up DNFing this. So Unfortunately, before I even finished the first chapter, I could tell this was gonna just have to be a DNF for me. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I know that this book is incredibly popular. In fact, it's a series. I know the series is incredibly popular. I am on the fence as to whether I'm gonna end up DNFing this book or not. I finished the first chapter. I'm gonna continue reading at this point, but I'm unknown. I'm unknown how far I'm gonna get. This is a YA story with our main character as a high school student. She has to do her like senior year project. She's decided to do an investigation into the death of a local teen to see if she can figure out like, well, I guess we don't even know at this point if it's a death, right? She might just be missing. She's doing an investigation to figure out what happened to this local teen. Based on the format so far, it looks like that's also going to include sections in this book where we get to read our main character's like journal entries, kind of detailing her process of the investigation, some interviews that she's documenting. So it's gonna kind of be like a multimedia kind of a reading experience as we go through it. I think when that's done in the right way for me, I can get into that. But I know, like, I recently read a book, which one was it? True crime story. And that kind of formatting in the book really did not work for me. So I'm unknown yet if this author is going to do the storytelling of like the multimedia experience in a way that I'm gonna be able to get into. Also, I'm undetermined how true crimey this is gonna be, because I'm not really into true crime anymore. I was for many, many years, but I'm really not anymore. In the past year, I've definitely kind of shied away from true crime stuff. And as a person, for years, I obsessively watched like Dateline and 2020, every week, and I would listen to true crime podcasts. I'm just really not into true crime anymore. I don't know if that will change at some point in the future, but for right now, I recognize it's something that I'm just not into. I think I'm gonna have to read further into this, like I'm not DNFing it right now, just to see how true crimey are we getting. Is this gonna actually be like just a mystery investigation, or are we going true crime in this storytelling? So I'm gonna read further. If it turns out to be like, yeah, this is just true crime, I'm probably gonna end up DNFing it, but as of right now, I can't tell for sure, so I'm gonna keep reading. Into the Drowning Deep. I am once again on the fence about this one after having read the very short first chapter in this book. This is supposed to be about the disappearance of a ship and like its crew. The ship was out for like a research / documentary voyage, and like everyone on the ship disappeared. No one knows what happens to them. So the first chapter, we see the sister of one of the people on the crew. We get introduced to her and just like a tiny bit about her sister who was on the ship. I'm intrigued by the setup because this is gonna be like a supernatural fantasy horror book, and there's like some, I don't know, possibly murderous mermaids that killed the crew on the ship, unknown. The thing that makes me hesitate right now as to knowing if I'm gonna be able to like actually finish this book is, even during the tiny first chapter, I felt like we got so sidetracked by descriptions of things that I just didn't care about. Like, for example, the hair dyeing of the main character and her sister was brought up multiple times in a very, very short first chapter. And I'm just like, why do I care about this? Why do I care about the quality of their hair dye jobs? I don't care about that. There was also like an entire paragraph about a time when our main character went out into like the ocean and in a riptide as a kid, and like I didn't really see how that was at all relevant to what was going on in the story. Like, it wasn't even introduced in a way where it was like, the ocean can do like crazy dangerous things. It was just kind of like, I don't know, thrown in there as an anecdote. It just felt weird. I don't know. I can't tell yet if I'm gonna be okay with the writing style of this author. I'm gonna keep reading because the plot does intrigue me, but I'm just not sure if I'm gonna vibe with the writing style in this. The Book Eaters. I am definitely continuing reading this one because I was reading the first chapter that was, again, very short, and I was just like, what the fuck? We go from our main character, this woman in like a liquor store or a convenience store trying to buy alcohol because she's trying to like numb her emotional problems with alcohol, to the end of the chapter shoving this dude into her son's room with the implication the son is going to eat him. This first chapter was like all over the place. I don't even know what's happening. I am definitely intrigued to know more though, so I will be continuing this book. Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. I wasn't really sure what to expect when I started reading this. I kind of had an idea that it was going to be totally different writing style than it is, but it turns out that is like a very positive thing. So far I really like the writing style. It's like subtly funny. Our main character is out of work in San Francisco. It sounds like he's wants to be a tech bro, but kind of like couldn't really get off the ground with that. So he's job searching. He decides to apply for a job in a really unusual bookstore in kind of a, let's say, an interesting part of the city. So he gets in there, the bookshop is unusual, the owner is unusual, the entire like interview hiring process is unusual, and it's kind of one of those situations where the main character does a like record scratch, this is me, you might be wondering how I got into this situation kind of a thing. But I thought it was done well, and I am intrigued to know more. I like books about books, so I'll for sure continue reading this. Everyone in my family has killed someone. This one I have some high hopes for. I'm not quite sure though exactly like where we're gonna go in this, but I'm okay. So far, I'm along for the ride. The author starts off with the rules for the Detectives Club, the club that Agatha Christie and a bunch of other mystery writers were in way back in the day, almost like 100 years ago now, where they had rules for how they would approach their writing, and it was detective fiction. So the author puts that at the forefront, kind of makes it clear that they want to like play fair in writing a murder mystery. But then the first chapter details a murder where there's like no real mystery about who done it. So I'm not exactly sure where this book is gonna go, but it's written in a way where it's funny in like, it's very like, it's a dark humor kind of funny, which I love dark humor. I'm absolutely gonna keep reading this one. It's amusing and intriguing, so this one I'm continuing as well. That is my update for now. We marked several off the list so far, so those are gone. The next time you see me, it will either be to check in because I've DNF'd another book, or because I have finished one of the library books and I'm gonna talk about it. So I will see you soon. I have just a quick update on a couple of the library books that I've gotten into. So A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, I did decide ultimately to DNF this. It got increasingly just true crime rather than like mystery or anything like that. And there was nothing wrong with it. I didn't think it was bad. For YA and for true crime, I thought it was pretty good, but true crime just doesn't interest me right now, and so I'm gonna go ahead and DNF it. I got to about the 10% mark. If you are into YA and or true crime, I would say this one might be for you. I thought that it was pretty enjoyable as far as that goes. I just haven't been into true crime for quite a while, and so putting this one away for now. If I ever do come back to true crime, I will continue this one because I thought it was pretty good for what it is. The two that I'm focusing on reading right now are The Book Eaters, which has gotten less crazy, and now we're just into kind of the mysterious part of it about this family, or it sounds like a community of people who actually eat books. I'm mostly seeing the origin story of the main character right now, but I am enjoying it so far. It's like mysterious. I don't know if this is gonna be any horror, if it's just gonna stay fantasy, but I anticipate I'll probably end up finishing this one, so you might not get another update about it till I actually finish, and then I'll just give a review of it. The other one that I'm focused on reading right now is Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. I've really been enjoying this. It doesn't seem to take itself too seriously. I can't tell yet if like if this is in fact going to be fantasy. I'm inclined to think that it is, but I'm just having a good time. It's kind of lighthearted. I've been reading it before bed. Right now it's just a little bit mysterious. So this is another one that I anticipate I'll probably finish to the end. I'm fine with how it's being written. I'm intrigued enough to figure out what's going on with this bookstore. So yet another one. You probably won't see an update on it until I get to the end. The other two books I have, Into the Drowning Deep and Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. I'm not going to start either of those until I finish the Book Eaters, so I won't have an update on those until later in the video. So I guess the next time you see me, it will either be to talk about a DNF or to give a review for either Mr. Penumbra or the Book Eaters. All right, please forgive the crazy lighting that I've got going on. I'm looking in the camera and I feel like I look like a ghost or something right now, but it's the best lighting that I've got at the moment, so we're just gonna roll with it. I look very goth in this lighting. I finished the Book Eaters and I've been mulling over for a couple of days like what I actually think about it. So I didn't actually just finish it. I've wanted to think about it because there were some things that I thought were done really well, like some good ideas, but I just don't know. I don't know how I feel about the book overall. I'm still thinking about it. So maybe at the end of this little segment, maybe I will arrive at like a rating conclusion, or it might have to just wait until like my wrap up for the month as I think through it more, because I gotta tell you, I just can't decide at the moment whether I really liked this or not. So let's talk about it. So the story is about our main character and her family, or families, which she is a book eater and she's part of the Eaters Society. In the society, there's book eaters, which is what she is, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You eat books instead of food. There's also mind eaters, which, you guessed it, eat minds instead of food. The eaters look human, but like internally they are very different. Like they have very different anatomy, organs. They clearly sustain themselves in a way that's different from humans. So they're a different species, and we know that from the beginning. We don't get a lot of details on how exactly they came to be. I guess ultimately it doesn't really matter, although that did intrigue me, I have to admit. That was never really addressed, like where did these eaters come from? But whatever, it doesn't matter. They live among humans, but like separately from them. So like eaters, they have homes. They are kind of like a really closed community with other eater families, and they have to be really careful about how they intermarry and reproduce with each other, because obviously they want to avoid like things like inbreeding and stuff like that. But they've found that over time their population is dwindling because they're not getting as many females anymore as they used to. And that's a problem they're trying to work on, because their species is going to be gone if they can't figure something out with the reproduction. Our main character, she's born and raised in this society, so like the way that they live, very secretly and very controlled, it's super normal to her, but she grows increasingly unhappy and upset at seeing the kinds of things that go on. Shockingly, it's a very controlled society, and that results in the women being the primary target of the ultimate control that goes on. This is a very patriarchal, like closed society of eaters. While the girls and the women in this society are kind of given the impression that they're of an elevated status, like they're revered because women are desperately needed to continue their eater species. What it really comes down to is that the men in the society use all of this as just an excuse to like control and suppress the women. They don't allow women to access like education or anything like that. They're very careful about the kinds of books that women eaters can consume. Like our main character is only allowed to consume fairy tales. I presume it's to keep them sheltered and helpless, give them a very narrow view of what the world is like. The narration follows our main character from a little girl up until the present day, but it's not linear. Like it jumps back and forth between present day to the past. I thought the author did a good job at showing how the main character is trying to like deconstruct this, I don't know, I guess I would call it a cult, a very closed community, a very intense control. So I don't know, for lack of a better word, let's call these eaters kind of a cult community. I think the author did a good job at showing the main character like gradually deconstructing from everything she's been programmed with since she was born. So I thought that was fairly realistic, the process that the main character went through. I also thought the portrayal of her son Kai was pretty good, realistic. Her son is a mind eater rather than a book eater, and he has kind of the mentality, like, he doesn't have the mentality of a little boy. I think chronologically in the present day, he's supposed to be like 4 or 5 years old. He definitely has the mentality of like an adult in many ways. And I thought the author did a good job at writing him in an unsettling way, because like it's unsettling to have what should be a little kid, but like they're talking to you like they're 30 years old, right? Like it's unsettling to have that. And I wouldn't say it was creepy. I think it was just realistically portrayed as like, this is not the way this should be. Like, this little boy should be a little boy. It shouldn't be the mentality of a grown man. And I also liked this book seemed to want to explore some more interesting topics. Like, our main character, because of the society, the way that there's limited women, what happens is a woman will marry into a family and she'll stay married into that family until she gets pregnant and has a baby, and then she will leave after a couple of years, like after the baby is weaned, and go and marry someone else in a totally different family. So like, mothers are really they're non-existent in the society except to give birth, and then they're basically like a couple years after that they're gone. So the children are raised by the father's families. It doesn't seem like the men really take a fatherly role, though. It seems like it's more of a collective family, like group effort thing just to raise these kids. Maybe like the aunts will take a role in raising the children, but I don't, there didn't seem to be like a traditional mother or father figure in the lives of the kids in the society. It seemed just like a communal family in general. But our main character, after she gives birth, she realized she has this instinct to want to be a mother. Like, she doesn't want to follow the tradition of leaving her kids like they're supposed to. She wants to stay and be able to raise a baby. She also has a self-awareness. She feels like she doesn't know how to be a parent because she never really had one. I mean, she did have her uncle as a father figure, but much more hands-off than what we would consider to be like an involved parent. So our main character throughout the book is constantly second-guessing herself and her abilities as a mother, and I think it's because, really the only frame of reference that she has is like any portrayal of a parent from like a fairy tale that she's been allowed to consume. She really hasn't seen mothering in action or fathering in action, frankly, so she's just kind of winging it and second-guessing herself the whole way. Throughout this book, I felt like the author was touching on the concepts of like, what does it mean to be a good person or a bad person? And like, can you be a good person but do bad things? Does it make you a bad person if you do bad things, like by default? Do your motives or like the limited options that you have, do they change that? Does that get taken into consideration? I think these are really interesting questions to like think about. I don't know that I would say that there was any like good characters in this book. There were good characters who did bad things, like, for sure, and there's bad characters who did a lot of bad things. Maybe occasionally they do, something that's not bad. I can really only think of maybe like 2 good characters in this book, but they were still willing to do like bad things, depending on the context and your point of view, bad things. Which would be like her brother-in-law. He came across to me as generally a pretty decent dude. And this reporter that came to their house at the beginning of the book, he seemed like a generally pretty decent dude. But if you look at them from the point of view of the families, you would have a different point of view as to, maybe you probably would think they're not good if you're part of like the Eater families. But for me as an outsider and a reader, I'm like, no, I think that these two people were perfectly fine and good. I don't know. I just think that it's an interesting debate to have because, no one is like purely good or purely bad, right? We're all shades of gray, or we're good, but we might do bad things, or bad people can do good things too. So I don't know if the author was intending for you to start thinking along those lines with the characters, but I definitely was throughout the entire book thinking about like who in this is good and who is bad, and like I think this person is mostly good, but they're doing some pretty terrible things. So are they still good? And also, I gotta say, shout out to the multiple mentions of Final Fantasy in the Book Eaters. It was mentioned in multiple chapters, like the main character becomes interested in the Final Fantasy series, and I am a huge fan of the Final Fantasy series. I love to see that. I love to see that unexpectedly in a book, and so I'm gonna give a little point to the author for that one. I really liked it. There were some things though that took away from this book for me. I ended up being more interested in the chapters that took place in the past than the ones that were taking place in the present. I'm not sure exactly why that is. I was somewhat impatient for the chapters that were happening in the present. I felt like they were kind of slow, and I was always just eager to get through them to go and see the next chapter, which would generally be something that took place in the past. I'm wondering if it's because the chapters alternated, like one would take place in the past and then the next one would be in the present and then the next one in the past. I'm wondering if maybe they had gone like chronologically, if I would feel differently about like the pacing, if I would still be impatient, if I would still be kind of disinterested in what was happening in the present. I'm not sure. But as it stood, I was a lot more interested to see the chapters that took place in the past leading up to this point than I was to actually see like what was going on like right now for the character. The second half of the book, I noticed I got a lot more impatient to kind of like get to the point of what we were doing, and I started to feel like it wasn't a good kind of impatient. It just kind of felt, it started to feel like the present events were kind of redundant or like dragging out maybe in order to like fill time before we could jump back to the past to see what had been happening there. I also felt like there was some, oh, you can see my cat has decided to join us. She's exploring right now. I also felt like there were some missed opportunities in the second half of the book, like with the way some things were handled. Like there was a creepy cult in a creepy house, and we could have gone into that in this like creepy book eater society, but we barely did. Like we barely touched on the creepiness that I think could have been expanded on, so I was kind of disappointed in that. We also had characters who like barely knew each other, who all of a sudden had like this romantic thing going on. It just felt out of place because it happened so fast. Like these are two people who like can't trust anyone and realistically should not trust each other, but now all of a sudden they're like willing to die for each other. And I'm like, but like, why though? Because I don't see a logical reason as to why they should suddenly be like, I'm willing to die for you, like you're so amazing. It just it seemed rushed, and when things like that are rushed, it takes me out of the story. So I feel like maybe the author pushed on the gas too hard for that one, because we just got into the realm of like, I don't know that I believe that these two characters who like are very self-aware that they should not trust each other, and they're now like, I will give up my life for you. There was also like some very convenient events and like, I don't know, emotional dumping, I guess, by characters at the end. And it just felt too convenient. It felt like too coincidental, too convenient, and I had a hard time buying into the events in like the last few chapters of the book because they were all just circumstantially, I'm like, what are the odds that like all of this would be playing out like this? I don't know. Overall, I thought that the idea for this book was really good. I liked the uniqueness of like the Eaters and the Eater Society, and I'm still mulling over how I ultimately feel about it. It's a book that I could see myself recommending to people if they want something that's like a unique fantasy. I think that this could hit the mark for a lot of people. I'm still just debating on like how I actually feel about how it was told, like especially with the switching back and forth between past and present. I'm just still not sure how I feel about that. So I'm gonna mull it over a little more, and I will either, maybe I will have a star rating by the end of this video, or maybe it will have to be by like in my October wrap up. So, but right now I'm in the middle of everyone in my family has killed someone. It's been very amusing so far. It's like a murder mystery. So I'm gonna try to finish that one tonight, maybe tomorrow, but I'm gonna try to make it tonight. And then I'm gonna move on to Into the Drowning Deep. I just finished Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone like literally 5 minutes ago, and I couldn't wait to actually talk about it because it really delivered what I was hoping it would. When you give a title like that, I'm hoping for something that's going to be, if you hear the blinds, once again, that's my cat. She can't help herself. She's very excited about what's going on in the backyard. There's a squirrel or something probably. Anyway, when I get a title that's very intriguing, or a cover, because I'm always sucked in by a cover too, like give me an intriguing title and or an intriguing cover. Please though, please live up to the expectations that you're gonna set. I think that this book really did. It gave me the impression when I was going in that it was going to be something funny in like a murder mystery. And it was. It was a lot of self-aware humor, and the main character spends a lot of time like actually talking to the reader. It felt while I was reading it like the narrator was talking to me, not just telling me a story, like narrating a story to a general reader, but it felt like the author was sitting telling me a story, and it just happened to be in book form. There was a lot of meta stuff, which I absolutely love when things get meta, so I was on board for that. The whole story is definitely an homage to Golden Age crime fiction like Agatha Christie, which I love Agatha Christie. It's clear that this author does too, because not only were like a lot of the plot points directly following the tropes that you would see in the old crime mysteries, but the author puts in the book, once again, very self-aware of the rules of Golden Age crime, and the way that he's trying to tell the story is in line with how a book would have been told from that period. And it's a classic setup too. We follow our main character as he goes to a family reunion on a secluded mountain where it's snowing pretty bad, the roads are somewhat treacherous, so you think to yourself, well, this is a classic setup for a murder, isn't it? Indeed it is. And maybe not just one murder either. Maybe there's going to be multiple murders. I don't know. I won't spoil anything here for you. He shows up to this reunion. Things are not entirely what he expected they would be. Like he's kind of on the outs with his family, so he's anticipating the weekend is probably going to be real uncomfortable for him, but he goes anyway. Indeed, it starts out very awkward, and then things kind of snowball, no pun intended, because of all the snow there. And there's a little bit of murder that, well, considering who his family is and all of the dubious personalities in it and their questionable history and behavior, pretty much everyone is a suspect. So we follow our main character as he attempts to solve a series of crimes, which does include murder. He's not a professional, he's not like a law enforcement, he's not a Poirot, you know, this amazing detective with these highly advanced detecting skills or anything like that. He's just a rando. He's a rando, and it's fallen upon him to try to solve whodunit. The humor in this book and just the general narration, like the tone, really, really worked for me. It was lighthearted despite all of the murder and family issues that are going on in this very dysfunctional group of people that are related to each other. It still felt like a lighthearted, enjoyable book. I did also really appreciate he was able to get me so invested. Like there would be scenes where I was like frantically trying to read as fast as I could to figure out what was going to happen next. There was a scene involving a truck, which I will not spoil, which I was just frantically, I was reading as fast as I could because I'm like, what is going to happen here? Nothing good is going to happen here. I have to see if this is going to be as bad as I think it is, or how they're going to get out of this one, or what. Just overall, this author's writing absolutely worked for me, and I now want to go and see the other books that he's written, because I think this is maybe his third book that he's written, and I just briefly Googled it in the 5 minutes since I finished reading, and I think it's going to be adapted by HBO, maybe. I will 100% be watching that. if in fact they are doing an adaptation. Overall, this was just a really fun book to read. I know that I'm biased because I love books that I find very amusing. I also love Agatha Christie, you know, Golden Age crime books. So really, it was like this book was written for me or anyone like me. If you like Golden Age crime, and if you like, I would say, like the Richard Osman series, which is a little bit funny, you know, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, you might really like this one as well. I would say this one was a great send-up. Like, it paid a lot of respect to Golden Age crime, and it was very amusing. I would say I found this funnier than I find the Richard Osman books. The Richard Osman books amuse me. I like it's more of a lighthearted tone with those as well. I felt like this author, there were times where I did more than just like the exhalation that's like the fast out your nose when you're amused, like, you know, that where you're like, that's what I normally do to Richard Osman, but this one, there were a few points where I not only did that, there were points where I actually laughed, like, out loud for real, like, lolling for real, because it was funny, it amused me, and once again, I have to say, I love meta stuff, and this was filled with meta. Like, the author wrote the narrator to be hyper aware of telling the reader a story, and so it just made it feel more personal with the way that he chose to tell it. Overall, I would say this was a 5-star book. I had the most fun time reading this. Like, I thought I was gonna really like this one. It's been on my radar since it came out. I think it came out in the beginning of the year, like January or February or something like that. It's been on my list since it came out. I just have not gotten to it before now. And I really suspected I was gonna really like it. And it turns out I did. And I love when things just, all the pieces come together in that way, much like the puzzle pieces of a classic whodunit. So yeah, I am super happy with this one. I really recommend it to anyone who loves classic mystery and who likes books that are amusing too. The next one that I am gonna try to get through is Into the Drowning Deep, trying to alternate because the one I have after that is Mr. Penumbra, which is also more lighthearted. So Into the Drowning Deep, I think, is going to be more horror, or like at least darker, like sci-fi kind of darker feel. So I'm trying to alternate that, you know, like I'm on a high right now, gonna kind of delve into maybe some darker horror, like unpleasant stuff, and then hopefully end on a high with Mr. Penumbra. So I'll be back with an update likely of Into the Drowning Deep. I finished Into the Drowning Deep, and to be honest, I have some really like conflicting feelings about this book. I wasn't expecting that. It's definitely a horror story, and it involves mermaids, some evil mermaids. So it was a unique enemy in that sense. I feel like we don't typically get like bad versions of mermaids. We get more like Disneyfied versions of mermaids. This one, they were some evil mermaids. The book starts off with this ship that it goes missing, so it's being sent out into the ocean, the Mariana Trench, by this movie studio. They want to make like a documentary or a mockumentary about mermaids, so they send this giant ship out there with like researchers and filming crews and all of these people on it, and it's discovered that everyone on the ship goes missing, presumed lost at sea. However, they get footage because they've been recording everything that happened on the ship. So they get footage of what happened, and it looks like some gnarly looking sea creature, mermaid-like things come out of the ocean and like kill everybody. That is what the footage shows. Now, a lot of people, when they see this in the public, they think it's a hoax because it's like movie studio wanting publicity, but it is not a hoax. But like, none of the people involved at the movie studio or the scientists, they don't really have more information. They still want to find out what the hell happened on this boat. That's just the setup for this. We don't really get to see a whole lot of what happened on the ship. I think there's a prequel to this that does go into the details of what happened, but I haven't read that. We don't actually see in this book really too much of what happened except what's on that footage. So our main character, her sister was on that ship. So several years after that initial ship disappears, the film studio, Imagine Films, they come to her and they say, look, we're sending out another ship. We want to find out what the hell happened out there. We obviously know the footage contains these creatures. We want to find these mermaids. So they're going to send out a ship with like film crew. They're going to have a bunch of scientists. They want to like prove the existence of mermaids, and they want to see like if they can figure out what happened to the crew of the original ship. That's the setup. That's where everything starts. We see our main character. She ultimately agrees to go, and we watch the voyage, right? As they sail. Well, I say sail, but they're not a sailboat. They're like a giant ship. They go out to the Mariana Trench, and they start doing like different research, observations, and as you might expect, things go horribly, horribly wrong, right? Because there's evil mermaids involved. So I did really like the horror aspect of this. I thought that it was done really well. The author is Mira Grant, and that's a pseudonym for Shannon McGuire. I thought the author did a really good job at the horror, like bringing you into the whole environment, the atmosphere of being alone in just the vast, desolate Pacific Ocean, Mariana Trench, you know, the deepest point in the ocean, right below all of these researchers on this ship, with possibly some like real evil creatures. But with that environment, you know, it's this big ship, tons of researchers on it, and they're trying to figure out this mystery of what happened and if these creatures in fact exist. They're trying to prove it. But you feel the isolation because they're at sea. There's no other ships. The author mentions that where they end up like stationed in the ocean is miles away from like shipping lanes. So it's not like there's a bunch of even cargo ships anywhere near them. Like they are isolated out in the Pacific, which is already this vast wilderness that I think for most of us is kind of hard to think about just how much water is out there with like no civilization in it. We do get several instances through the story of seeing like what's happening in the water, in the ocean, sometimes down deep, sometimes at the surface, regardless, but like in the ocean. I thought that that was probably the best part of the horror, the way that it was just slowly developed. I think she did a really good job at making you feel like you're actually in this isolated ocean with whoever or whatever we might be looking at in a scene. That kind of horror really sucked me in, and I thought that it was executed really well in this book. It just made it really easy to feel like that primal, instinctual kind of fear of like dark water enclosed around you. Like I've watched movies that kind of like spark that kind of primal fear in me, but I don't know that I've ever seen it executed as well in a book as I thought that the author did in this one. And again, like super creepy mermaids that are not Disneyfied. I liked that aspect of it. You know, the antagonists in this book are some mermaids that are not Ariel. Ariel is not under the sea at the Mariana Trench. Okay, if you're looking for that kind of mermaid, don't go looking there because that's not what's down there. Over the course of the book, of course, you know, it turns into like a survival horror story, which, I mean, I can get into survival horror, so I didn't really have a problem buying into that. I really liked that development, the horror aspect, the way that that was executed. But I did also have a lot of things with this book that kind of bothered me as I was reading. And so I'm just really torn on how I feel about it. Like the characters, I didn't really find any of the characters particularly likable. Some of that I think was completely intentional on the part of the author. Like there's a researcher on the ship who happens to be the ex-boyfriend of our main character. Clearly the author wants us to dislike him. Like he's a huge jerk. He's basically like an incel. There's no way that I think the author wants you to actually like that guy, because he's written very clearly in like, just like, man, why would you date this guy? Like, what an asshole. But then there's characters where I feel like I should like them. Like the author intends for me to root for certain characters that I just found really unlikable. I found our main character to be unlikable. I didn't really think that she had too much of a personality aside from like self-righteousness. That self-righteousness was basically the entire personality of our main character. And the same with her best friend, who was also a researcher on this ship. just a whole lot of self-righteousness, and he wants to throw money around all over the place to get the things that he wants. And there's a young woman that's on the ship who's like, she's a reporter. I don't know that reporter is the right word. She's working for the movie studio as the person who's like the on-face personality of documenting what exactly all the researchers on the ship are doing to try to figure out what happened to the original ship. So whatever that is, she's the on-screen personality doing, like, working with the documentary. I really didn't find her endearing like I think the author wanted me to. I felt like she was too underdeveloped for me to have like really any feelings about her. I don't know. Dislike might even be too strong of a word for her. Mostly I was indifferent. I was indifferent to her. But that's what I mean. Maybe the only character that I liked in this book was like, I don't know, Ray the cameraman. I think his name was Ray, the cameraman guy. But like we barely got to see him. So I barely got any of Ray. Don't really know a whole lot about Ray. What little of him I saw, I did like, but we barely saw him. He seemed like a cool dude. I like the cameraman guy, but that was about it. Every other character I either disliked or I was like indifferent to. I think a lot of the characters in this book came across to me like caricatures, and again, I had such a hard time in understanding if that was intentional on the part of the author or if that was just how it was coming across to me. And it started like at the beginning, because the beginning of the book starts out in the Bay Area of California, like Monterey Bay. Now I'm biased because I'm from Northern California, so I'm very familiar with the Bay Area, but the way that the author started writing it was like a caricature of California and Californians, like just a bunch of stereotypes slapped together. It kind of reads in a way of like someone who has like never been to California, or maybe has been one time, but like they spent a lot of time like taking in the media stereotypes of what California and Californians are. And that's what, like, imagine my shock when I Googled this author and it turns out she's from the Bay Area. And I'm like, that's so strange, because this to me definitely reads like someone that is not from there. It came across as like, I rolled my eyes at a lot of it because I'm like, this is not matching up with my experience of living in California, like particularly Northern California, like at all. If it was intentional, like if the author did that on purpose, I could see a lot of this book being like if it was intentionally ridiculous, I think that I would have no problem in like the buy-in and really enjoying it. But I can't get a read. No pun intended. I can't get a read on whether the author intended for some aspects of this book to come off as like cliche, stereotype, caricature things, or if I'm supposed to take it all seriously. So that's kind of where I'm like going back and forth on how I feel about this book. Like just the writing style and so many of the analogies in this book, I found them kind of, if I'm supposed to take him seriously, I found it cringy. If I'm supposed to take this as like some kind of dark humor, then I could find it entertaining. Like there's some things that like she kept throwing in these analogies. I made note of a couple of them for examples. Let me read one or two. Okay, so here's an example. I've got a couple of examples. She'd been cut from his life as easily as cutting an abalone from its shell. Don't let it break you. It's okay, Mom. I'm already broken. Okay. The book was just filled with things like that. And so that's why I'm like, if this was written to be like tongue-in-cheek, she wants me to find those kinds of things like ridiculous, then you know what, I could get down with that. If this is supposed to be like a self-aware, cringy kind of writing style, I could get down with it. But I can't tell if she wants to be like, if she's seriously writing this, she wants me to take it seriously, because if she does, I just find myself cringing at those kinds of like little sprinklings of like dialogue or descriptions. So I don't know. I don't know if maybe Shauna McGuire, also known as Mira Grant, maybe her writing is just not for me. I guess I would need to read more of her books to find out. Because again, like, and I've read interviews. She does AMAs on Reddit. She's done several, and she seems to have a good sense of humor. And so that's what's also making me question, like, am I supposed to take this as like not take it seriously, like it's all supposed to be kind of ridiculous and funny? I can't tell. If somebody knows, let me know. If you've read this, what was your perception of Mira Grant's writing style? Did you think that it was funny, or did you think it was cringy? Like, was this supposed to be kind of like self-aware dark humor, or do you think the author was being like a really serious writing style as she was writing this, and that's how you took it? I need other opinions. I need other opinions for people's perception of this book, because I'm so torn. I really, really liked the horror and I liked the concept. I liked how the story unfolded, but the writing style and the characters took a lot of my enjoyment out of this story, because for most of the book I was reading it like seriously, and it was only towards the last, like, I don't know, the last quarter of the book where I started going, maybe this author doesn't want me to take this seriously. Maybe it's supposed to be kind of campy and ridiculous and just fun. I don't know. So I'm going to have to think about this. I'm going to have to think about this book some more before I can decide what I'm going to rate it, because I've got some mixed feelings. So I've only got one book left for my library reading. Finally, I'm going to be wrapping up Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore, and that's the next time you're going to see me. We made it. We made it for the final review, which of course is Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. I did get an unexpected bonus in this, because there was the prequel included at the end, which was Ajax Penumbra 1969. It was unexpectedly included at the very end of this ebook, and since it was a novella, I thought, what the heck, and I read that too. I ended up enjoying these books, but I feel like not as much as I could have if there had been a few changes to it, which I know is funny to be like, if it had been different, it wouldn't be the same as it is. Like, no kidding. But I think with a few changes, I could have found myself really getting into these books instead of just being like, yeah, I enjoyed that book. In the main book, we follow our primary character, who I know I said in the reading vlog, the main character is out of work. He decides to take a job in a local bookshop with somewhat of an eccentric owner, Mr. Penumbra, and it's somewhat of an eccentric bookshop as well. It's in San Francisco. It's like a super high bookshop. It doesn't go deep into the building, but it definitely goes vertically into the stacks. And our main character comes to realize that while there's a tiny amount of just like normal bookstore customers who are coming in to buy normal books, there's also a group of unusual people who come in often in the middle of the night and ask for a book from the stacks that include like the strange selection of books that our main character is not very familiar with. One day he ends up looking in one of these forbidden books, and he's very intrigued, and he tells a couple of his friends about it, and like everyone is very intrigued, and that leads them on this journey to participate in like this secret book society and a mystery they're trying to solve, and it goes back several hundred years. It's basically a book lover's dream, I think, to discover a book that's like a mystery you've got to solve, the book itself, not just like what the book is about, but the entire aura of the book itself is some kind of like secret mystery that you need to delve into. I mean, am I alone in that? Is that just me? As a kid, let me tell you, that was kind of one of my dreams, to come across a book that's like very mysterious and holds all kind of secrets that are not just within the pages, but the whole aura around the book is something that's, it's part of a bigger scheme. I really thought this book would have been so excellent. Like, it was set up in such a way that having it be some fantasy in it would have fit absolutely perfectly, like magical realism, something like that. But the author didn't do that, which, I mean, that's fine. But for me, I felt like it was a missed opportunity because, as I said, we deal with like this ancient book society trying to solve this mystery. And I won't give away what the mystery about the books are because that's part of the fun as you go through the book to try to figure out, like, why does this secret book society even exist anyway? Like, what are they even working towards? But I really felt like it was a missed opportunity to bring some fantasy into it. I thought that that would have taken it to another level to really raise my enjoyment of this book. But instead, I mean, it all takes place in the real world. And in fact, there's a lot of Silicon Valley involved in this book. For a book about books, this involved a lot of computers and tech. And I think that was part of the author's goal, was like the juxtaposition of like old world technology in books and also showing what it can do against new world technology like Google. Kind of weirdly, Google plays a pretty big role in this book, but I mean, it does take place in San Francisco, and there's a lot of tech people from Silicon Valley in it. So, I mean, it makes sense the way the author did it. It was just a pretty stark comparison because you're going between like this old-timey book society and like these old mysterious books and like super powerful mega computers from like one of, if not the most like powerful tech company on the planet. It was just a pretty stark difference to shift between the two throughout the book. I thought the author did a pretty good job of it, but I personally would have preferred more of like the old-timey focus, but that's just me. I'm biased. Like, I live in a tech age. I know what the real world is like with tech. I want some old-timey book mysterious stuff going on with like just the books. We don't got to bring technology into it. I liked most of the characters in this book. They were for the most part, they were pretty eccentric, but they really weren't very well fleshed out. I feel like, again, there was a lot of opportunity here that we just didn't really get into this as much as I would have liked us to. And at times, I found the pacing of the book a little too slow for me, but I was reading this as more of like a lighthearted book adventure. Like, specifically lighthearted, our main character is on a book adventure himself. So if I took that approach to it, it really didn't bother me. But again, I felt like in certain parts of the book, things kind of dragged. They kind of dragged out longer than I think they needed to. But if you're looking for like a fast-paced book adventure, this is not the book for you. If you're looking for something that's lighthearted and you're okay with just like taking a relaxing stroll into an adventure, maybe pick it up because maybe you would like it. I wouldn't describe it as like cozy. I know everything is like cozy now, but it felt like, even though it's presented in a way in the book where there's kind of high stakes, it really didn't feel high stakes as I was reading it. So if you want something that's just kind of like a casual read and a book about books, you could maybe try this. I would say this one was 3 stars, which for me means, yeah, I liked it. I didn't love it. And again, I think it's because there were just some missed opportunities for me in this book just based on the author's choices. I do also have to give a lot of credit to the author because this story takes place, as I said, in San Francisco, Northern California. Once again, I don't even know how many times I've mentioned it in this video, I'm a Northern California native. So I pay attention in books when authors are having the setting be Northern California. And I have to say, this one felt pretty realistic for where the author was having it primarily take place, especially considering Into the Drowning Deep, which I just read. The two portrayals of the same region felt so different. And strangely, I don't think this author is actually from Northern California, but I think he portrayed just like the feeling and the setting of the area really well. Whereas Into the Drowning Deep, that author is from Northern California, and that one, I was constantly like, this is not realistic at all. So who knows? Who knows? All I can say is I felt pretty good being able to get into just the atmosphere of the Bay Area that this author created for Mr. Penumbra. I will give points for that because it can take me out of the story when someone is portraying a setting that I have firsthand experience with. Like, not just Northern California, but in general, if it's like somewhere I've been or something I've done, the author is portraying it in a way that like doesn't match up with my own experience of it can take me out of the story, but I didn't feel that way for Mr. Penumbra. I thought he did a pretty good job. And that's it. That's all of my library reading that I finally got through. This batch of books is finally done, and I have very long holds on another group of books that, I don't know, maybe in a couple months I will finally get them, because the demand is high. Which, I mean, yeah, it's kind of annoying to have to wait like 4 months for a book that you've put a hold on, but I also love the idea that so many people want to read. Like, that's always a good thing. So not like I don't have other things to read in the meantime. I mean, my God, my physical TBR is far too long anyway, so I have plenty to get through while I wait. And that's all that I've got for you today. Have you read any of the books that I talked about, or did you like them, dislike them? Do you plan to read any of these books? Let me know what your thoughts are if you have any books that you're excited about and you have them on hold with your library too. That's all that I've got for you today. I always appreciate you coming by. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.